there is a theme that you'll regularly see with the guests on this podcast, and that is that they are willing to be very humble, that they do practice humility, and they're often the cleaner CEO, the idea that they're the ones that if they see garbage, they're going to pick it up. If that toilet needs to be unclogged, they'll go do it. But even more so, whatever phase that they and their business are in, they're willing to become the person necessary to help it get to the next level, to the next phase. And there's something about that sometimes I find with individuals when they first maybe like the idea, but they're not committed to the idea of becoming an investor or becoming an entrepreneur. And they're like, yeah, that sounds cool, but I never want to do this, or this. If you're already starting off an endeavor with a list of won't do's or can't do's or must haves, I suspect that your heart's not really in that undertaking.
Problems are what? Problems are profits!
Welcome to another episode of the Problems or Profits podcast. My name is Rebecca Lynn Matheson, aka the Canadian Cottage Girl, and I'm joined by my co-host Matt McKeever. Now, we've got a special episode for you guys today where we're going to actually have a little story time with Matt, and Matt is going to be talking a little bit about a fable, and specifically the one that we're going to go into is the Prodigal Son. So what I want to talk about just to start is what problems or profits really means to me. And for me, problems or profits really means anytime that you're faced with a challenge in life, it's a life philosophy on how you can overcome those challenges and get by or through any obstacle that comes in your way. And it really is waking up every single day and opting in to take on those challenges. It's so easy to be overcome by life and just have life happen to you. But when you opt into having those challenges as something that is within your ability to meet and take on, then that is what will allow you to drive forward and strive towards success in life. And that's really where that problems or profits philosophy and mindset for me comes from.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate that, Rebecca. And so I'm really excited for today's episode and just kind of talking to you guys about this story. So a little bit of context. I think stories are a very powerful way for people to learn. And oftentimes we can take very complex ideas and distill them down into a simple parable or fable. And that's able to hit home so much more than maybe a half-hour discussion or a half-hour essay written up. And so throughout this Problems and Profits podcast, the real goal is to highlight different stories from different entrepreneurs, different people that are trying to, make the most of whatever obstacles or challenges come their way and trying to really take those problems and pivot them into a profit opportunity. And when it comes to stories, I selfishly wanted to be able to use this podcast to explore a handful of different stories with the audience. And it doesn't matter what your favorite religious text is, doesn't matter whether you're looking at fables that have, lasted for generations. To me, what's really powerful is any story that's able to survive for centuries or even millennia. There's something there that we probably all could learn from. And so today, what I want to explore with you guys is that parable of the prodigal son. And essentially, before I even jump into it, I've got my Jefferson Bible here. I'm just going to read off the story to you guys. So if you'll humor me, I'll run through it quickly. And then I'd love to both explore what is the common interpretation of this, and then maybe taking our own problems and profit spin and adding another layer onto this story. Because at the end of the day, the story is only as valuable as the lessons we take away from it. So this is from Luke 15 for anyone that wants to read along. Then drew unto him all publicans and sinners for to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners and eateth with them. And he spake the parable unto them, saying, What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he lose one of them, doth not leave the 99 in the wilderness, and go after that which is lost until he find it? And when he hath found it, he layeth it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he cometh home, he calleth together his friends and neighbors, saying unto them, Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. I say unto you that likewise joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repenteth, more than over 99 just persons which need no repentance. Either what woman, having 10 pieces of silver, if she lose one piece, doth not light a candle and sweep the house and seek diligently till she find it? And when she hath found it, she calleth her friends and her neighbors together, saying, Rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I had lost. Likewise, I say unto you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over the sinner that repenteth. And he said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husks that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. And when he came to himself, he said, How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called the son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in the sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But his father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard murmuring and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said unto him, Thy brother is come, and thy father has killed the fatted calf before he had received him safe and sound. And he was angry and would not go in. Therefore came his father out and entered and entreated him. And he, answering, said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment, yet thou never gavest me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. And just to maybe give a little bit of like historical context or perspective here for anyone that maybe this is the first time hearing this story, or maybe it's your first time really digging deep into the story, there's actually a few pieces there that I think are very insightful towards understanding and interpreting this entire story. So first of all, understanding that this is Jesus essentially giving this talk to the Pharisees, right? To Pharisees and to Jewish leaders. And what he was really trying to hit home here was not only did this son aggrieve his father, but he essentially made one of the greatest, grievances that you could cause. Asking, essentially, he was wishing his father dead. Hey, I'd just like my inheritance now. I'd love to just walk off with your money. And back in those days, that would have just been something completely unthinkable. And yet the father obliged, and essentially the way you would do it back in that day is you divide your estate into 3 and give one to each son. And so in this case, gave 1/3 of his entire estate to his son. And then his son, takes the wealth, is frivolous with it, loses it in a faraway country, and essentially becomes so destitute that the only way he's able to eat is eating amongst pigs. And if you understand the Jewish faith, pigs, swine are often considered very dirty, unclean. And so this would literally be the lowest of the lows. So not only did he aggrieve his father with like one of the greatest offenses he could cause, but then found himself in a short period of time really struggling to make ends meet. And eventually decides that he's going to return to his father. And even if he has to be a servant, that he's willing to go through that because it'll be a better position. And he realizes the error of his way. Well, one other aspect in this story that I think is really important is that as he's approaching, even though he's far away, his father's able to see him. And one of the insights there that's often shared is, well, the father was already looking for his son. And so the father was already expecting his return. And I think usually when you explore these lessons, it's often explained to you that, Jesus was really trying to hit home with the extremeness of the change in the situation. And in fact, this is a trilogy of parables, right? We start off with the sheep, then we start off with the silver, and then finally we end with the son. And for me, the story of the son actually has even so much more that we can pull away from it. And where my mind naturally goes towards is blending it with another story, or a essentially characteristic or breakdown of a story, which is the hero's journey. So those of you that have heard me talk about this before, I'm a huge fan of Joseph Campbell, and he kind of breaks down the typical hero's journey. And now, whether you're looking at The Matrix, The Hobbit, Harry Potter, there's a very similar pattern that each one of these heroes ends up taking upon themselves. And oftentimes it starts off with a call to action. And in that moment, there's oftentimes a hesitation, a reluctance, a fear to go into the great unknown. And in this parable, essentially the son appears no fear to go into the great unknown as long as he's able to take his father's wealth with him. But once he finds himself in the great unknown, he's surrounded with fake friends, people that are happy to spend his money until there's no money left. But once there's no money left, there's no friends left either. And we could explore that in and of itself, because there's a lot of life lessons there. But for me, even more so when I'm thinking of this parable in particular, as well as the hero's journey, because of the ecosystem we've created here with Problems and Profits, a lot of young, aggressive, aspiring individuals find their way into our team and into our flock. And while that's exciting and they're very capable of a lot of things, oftentimes in order to even answer that call to action, you almost need a certain level of ego, right? You need to be willing to step outside of your known world. You need to usually be willing to make it anew, as in you want to put your own fingerprint or your own stamp on the new world. That's one of the reasons you're answering the call to action, to go explore or go, save the princess from the dragon, whatever the case may be. And when we're thinking of this, that ego serves you to a point. But in this parable, the son had too much ego. And so in my opinion, he essentially stalls short of Joseph Campbell's entire hero's journey, where he answers the call to action to go out into the world and make it anew in his own image, but he doesn't have the humility to seek a mentor. And not only does he not have the humility to seek a mentor, because he lacks that humility, he's unable to draw the right people towards him as well. So he only finds these fast and loose friends, these harlots that are willing to spend his money, but once it's gone, it's gone. And any successful hero ends up having to find their band of merry men, their counsel, their fellowship of 13 to help them go out into the world and be able to navigate all the trials and tribulations that come with one's individual hero's journey. And to me, that's just something that I see time and time again in our own ecosystem here with Problems and Profits, with the people that are drawn to me, to the team, because of our content, is oftentimes people are drawn because they want money or fame or power. But that same thing that has allowed them to step outside of their known universe, sometimes dropping out of university, quitting their day job, right? Turning their lives upside down by moving into one of the houses that we provide if our employees want to live in them. That same ego sometimes ends up holding them back from being willing to ask for help, ask for advice, ask for perspective. And oftentimes they can't even realize that there's oftentimes a mentor right in front of them. And that to me is very similar to the prodigal son, who didn't realize that his father was right there that could have actually taught him how he was able to build up or accumulate his wealth, how he was able to manage it and maintain it and not lose it to those fast and loose friends. And while for a lot of people, there comes a moment in time where we need to step outside of our family bonds in order to go explore and really become ourselves. At the same time, we shouldn't really be doing it completely alone. You should be finding mentors everywhere. You should be finding your band of merry men everywhere. And you should really be looking to surround yourself with like-minded individuals that want the best for you, because we end up becoming our environments, in my opinion. And that's really what I want to explore with you guys on this story time, is the power of not only understanding that sometimes we don't know what we want until we've lost what we already had, but even more so, really understanding that the hero's journey is not meant to be taken alone. You're not meant to go through all of life or even go through these trials and tribulations by your lonesome. You need to surround yourself with individuals. And I know for myself personally, there's no way I would be here. There's no way we'd have this podcast. There's no way we'd even have this philosophy of Problems or Profits had I not been willing and open to finding mentors, had I not been willing and open to building my band of merry men. And in fact, with hindsight, usually some of my biggest regrets are realizing that there was probably a mentor right there that I was just too blind or too ignorant or too embarrassed or too egotistical. Often, most of the time it's egotistical, to ask for advice or to be like, hey, I know you're a busy person. Hey, I know this, but could you give me any guidance on this or any steps? And again, now it's one thing to reach out to strangers on the internet, and I encourage you guys to do that, but understand that there's often not a relationship there or any bond or really any investment from their perspective to understand your level of seriousness. No matter where you are in life, I guarantee that there are some mentors available to you that you're probably overlooking on a daily or weekly basis. It may be a boss, it may be a coworker, it may be a cousin, it may be a friend's cousin. It could come from a multitude of different opportunities, but if we're too blind to it, it's so easy to walk through egotistically thinking, no one but me is going to get this done. No one cares about me. And so I'm going to have to figure this all out the hard way. And, doing it yourself is such an expensive teacher in the long run versus having the humility to actually reach out and build your tribe, to reach out and find a mentor or ideally a multitude of mentors to help you along the way throughout all the different trials and tribulations you choose to take on as you decide to make the world anew in your own image, or at least leave your stamp or fingerprint on it.
Absolutely, Matt. I think that there's some interesting just things to build on there when it comes to the fables that you've highlighted, and specifically about having resources and the ego that comes along with that. So in this fable, obviously this son actually goes away with resources and then loses all of those resources. And resources being in this story, money or gold or silver, or whatever the transactional value is put on whatever kind of monetization or form of payment at that time. And obviously in today's world, that's changing and evolving into cryptocurrency and a lot of different things. But when it comes to actually using that resource in this instance, he didn't have, as you said, the mentors to guide him along that path. And there was a great amount of ego around just having those resources and others knowing that he had those resources and utilizing those resources. There's actually this image that I've seen in the past of a table drawn out, and essentially on this table, the whole idea and philosophy around this table is who's at your dinner table, who's there to guide you along your life's journey. And in certain scenarios, in certain seats at the table, that person is there to guide you through different elements. So maybe you have the person that guides you through more personal matters. Maybe you have the person who you go to for relationship advice. Maybe you have the mentee sitting at your table that you're actually mentoring, and then you have your mentor that you go to for money or financial decisions. And I think it is really important when you look at it in that way to identify who are all of those guiding stars along your path and who are those people that you can have in your corner when making multiple different life choices. And it's really interesting in this fable that is one of the takeaway points, is having those checking points, because a lot of the guests that we have on this Problems or Profits podcast have a similar backstory in that they faced some sort of adversity or challenge to overcome to get to where they are in their business, in success in life. And I think something that can be pulled from that is sometimes starting from the bottom, more or less, can allow you that adversity and challenge to get to a very successful point in life, but it doesn't always have to be that way. But if you don't have the guidance in order to learn how to use those resources, or if you haven't started from a position where you didn't have those resources, then I think that it can often go in a negative direction, as what happened in this fable. And one of the things that I definitely think is interesting about highlighting fables like this is that the stories are so universal across time. Our language, or the way that we might speak about the fables, specifically even the way that it's written, it is very different across time. But I think that the actual lessons or universal truths behind a lot of these fables can be applied into everyday life and into your business as well. And one of the things that I find interesting in putting a lot of these fables or old time stories into context is not just talking about the year that they were written, but Joe Rogan has a great analogy when he's talking about, say, the World Wars, for instance. And he was riffing on this in one of his bits and just said, that was 3 people ago. And it's true. Like we haven't evolved that much over that period of time. It was like 3 people ago. And in the case of a lot of these old fables, it really, at the end of the day, passes over time because we're all still human and we haven't evolved that much. So these universal truths are still applied, even though that technology or the way that they're delivered has significantly changed.
Mm-hmm. And I guess if I was trying to do a modern take on the sheep or the silver parable, maybe it would go something like, who hasn't had an AirPod in their ear but lost the other and gone in search of it and torn their entire bedroom apart? And have you not looked in your closet 3 times, but you look a 4th just in the hopes that you'll find that lost AirPod? But for me, building upon your idea there, Rebecca, of starting from the bottom, there is a theme that you'll regularly see with the guests on this podcast, and that is that they are willing to be very humble, that they do practice humility. And they're often the cleaner CEO, the idea that they're the ones that if they see garbage, they're going to pick it up. If that toilet needs to be unclogged, they'll go do it. But even more so, whatever phase that they and their business are in, they're willing to become the person necessary to help it get to the next level, to the next phase. And there's something about that sometimes I find with individuals when they first maybe like the idea, but they're not committed to the idea of becoming an investor or becoming an entrepreneur. And they're like, yeah, that sounds cool, but I never want to do this, or this. If you're already starting off an endeavor with a list of won't do's or can't do's or must haves, I suspect that your heart's not really in that undertaking. But for me, one of the important things I want to make sure that people took away from this is, and we regularly share this with our Problems and Profits team, everyone's a mentor. So I really do view it as like a 360 degrees of mentorship with our team culture, our environment that we've created here, where, again, maybe I've got more real estate experience than most of the people in the room, but maybe they've spent more time at the gym. Maybe they've spent more time hunting. Maybe they've spent more time public speaking, or whatever the case is. There's no doubt a skill that they've been developing over the last multitude of years that I can gain something from. And again, when you approach life with that curiosity, it's so much easier to stumble into opportunities for mentorship versus the individual that's like, if you haven't made $1 billion, I don't want you as a mentor. Because understand that if you're coming from nothing, anyone with something can be a mentor of yours. If your goal is to eventually get to $1 billion, you may not actually start off with a billionaire as your mentor. It may start off with someone that's got a positive net worth. And then maybe they'll eventually introduce you, or you'll stumble upon to someone that, they're able to have a business and they've got 1 employee and they haven't gone bankrupt yet. And then you eventually come across the person that's able to pay themselves every year consistently as an entrepreneur. And again, to me, I really like to approach it like the TV show or the movie Highlander, where you can gain all this. And you don't have to kill them, though, but you can gain all this information from each individual, and you can move on to the next mentor when it's right for you. It's so important, though, that you guys find people that inspire you, people that have done what you want to do, and you have them be one of the influences in your life. Because once you find that Roger Bannister, that person that's ran the 4-minute mile, if that's your goal, to run a 4-minute mile, understanding that someone has done it before is very powerful. If you can find someone that, looks or sounds or feels like you that's done it, that's an even more powerful example to follow in. But for all of us, there are mentors everywhere. And I just want to encourage everyone to go out there and find a mentor as well as be a mentor. It is truly a very gratifying experience. And there's a lot you can learn from simply being a mentor.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think mentorship, and we've actually talked about this on the podcast too, is that oftentimes the mentor is not that like person that you just like DM and are like, hey, do you want to mentor me? And it doesn't happen like that. Like it's oftentimes just somebody in your life or somebody that you aspire to be. And I completely agree. I think that there's going to be an evolution of your mentors as you evolve and as you focus on different things. One other thing that I definitely want to touch on here is the first parable there with the sheep, and this can be such an important analogy over to your business in that sometimes certain things you don't need to chase after, especially if you're going after one sheep and leaving behind the 99. We actually had an episode, Matt, with Aaron Bay and Ariana, and they had talked about the fact that you sometimes are the bottleneck in your business. And I think that that is so true when it comes to any sort of venture that you're following. Dan also talked recently about how to build and scale multiple multi-million-dollar businesses, and oftentimes the person who you were to found the business and actually get the thing on the ground running, you need to be a different version of yourself in order to scale it to the first million, or in order to scale that $1 million business to $100 million. And I really think that sometimes if we focus on just that one sheep, or sometimes if we focus on that one thing that isn't actually the big picture thing that makes the needle move in your business, we can end up being super distracted and not actually moving forward. If that shepherd had focused on the 99 sheep and maintaining the herd there, or the flock, then he would have had 99 sheep rather than going after the one and just having one sheep. So I really think that there's a lot that can be taken from that, and especially when it comes to kind of tying in these two concepts together of having the right mentor at the right time, but also focusing on the big picture of what's going on and just taking a step back and analyzing the situation and understanding what the next big movers are for you in your business. I think that that is so important. If your business was operating sheep and you've just got one rather than 99, then I think that you've really gone down a bad path there if you're trying to create wool. But I think that a lot can be drawn from these parables, Matt. So it's a really interesting concept when we can take something as old as these fables and actually apply it to modern day life and actually create strategies for business from these sorts of concepts and ideas.
So again, appreciate you, Rebecca, as well as the audience indulging me as we kind of riff on this idea of exploring a fable or a parable. If you guys enjoyed this, let us know, because it is definitely off the beaten path when it comes to the content that you've likely came to hopefully know and love at this point in regards to the Problems and Profits podcast. So leave us a comment, leave us a written review, all that great stuff, and appreciate you guys listening along. If you've got any story suggestions for us, any parables, anything that you'd love us to explore, send me a DM on Instagram. I love talking about stories. So
awesome. Thanks for joining, guys, on another episode of the Problems or Profits podcast, and we'll see you on the next one.